Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Sheri Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on May 26, 2023 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. Before I get into this week's astro news you can use, first, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And from there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And a quick reminder, the show drops now every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. So you can listen live or you can listen anytime after. And while you're on that website at karmicevolution.com, you'll see above the most recently posted show a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our natal sun sign, needs to be happy. And this is based on an interview I did with Steve a couple years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it'll sign you up for my Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, but you can, of course, unsubscribe anytime. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some words of astrological wisdom. Separately, just a reminder, you can always find me on my Facebook page, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. I post on Instagram under karmic.evolution, so feel free to follow me there as well. The only caveat I will say is that I tend to write long because, with these astrological aspects, one thing leads to another, and in order to make a coherent, continual thread, they have a word limit. So if you want to get the full gist of it, Facebook is better, but I know a lot of people don't bother with Facebook anymore. So the choice is up to you. Now, finally, I'm offering still my discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, and this offer is for podcast listeners only. My regular price for that reading, which may go a little bit longer, is $180. So if you're interested in astrology and you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about why you're here, what's your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, and you'd like to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back from achieving your highest destiny in this lifetime, and often that comes with interest in one particular or two particular areas of our lives. Could be our relationships, careers, jobs, finances, health, any of the above, right? Then this is the reading for you. So we'll look at how the energies into which you entered this lifetime might be keeping you back now, stuck in old habitual patterns, or what I call soul-conditioned behavior, which is based on past experiences either from earlier this lifetime or from this lifetime and past lives. and how such knowledge can assist you to make different, more positive choices moving forward instead of the ones we've been conditioned to make. So if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, I'm telling you that's easy when you take advantage of this special discounted offer by going to karmicevolution.com/karmic125. As I always like to say, conscious awareness has never been either so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get into this week's astro news you can use now. The energy, now as usual, and I say this often at the beginning of my podcast, I'm going to go back. Next week is not particularly astrologically eventful, so I want to take a look back because as many of you who are regular listeners know, this is how we learn astrology, when we see certain aspects happening in the sky and then learn how they actually manifested. It gives us a better ability to look forward and predict or forecast how similar aspects, when they reoccur in the sky, might affect us here on terra firma or planet Earth. So, again, the energy shifted last week just after the May 19th Taurus new moon asked us to plant seeds that will blossom into a new set of more relevant values. And it was aided by a sextile to motivating Mars in Cancer and a trine to social reformer Pluto in Aquarius. And the energy shifted when Mars entered Leo and opposed Pluto in Aquarius the day after the new moon on May 20th. So here's basically what I said last week about this Taurus new moon energy. It's also now under the auspices of resistance to change. Remember, we want to Taurus new moon, plant seeds that result in the birth and growth of new set of values, which means inherently that we may have to discard some of the old values to make room for the new. So Taurus, we know, is resistance to change, but the new moon was actually telling us don't resist, just plant something else. And, if this part of the field is fallow now because those old values from 1980 in the Reagan years or from the Clinton years or whatever. Yeah, I'm going political. But that should be no surprise for regular listeners. That, we're not to resist, which is a bit of a dichotomy, right, at the Taurus new moon. I mean, Taurus new moons aren't about resistance. They're about planting something new. So anyway, the new moon occurred still under the auspices of resistance to change by fearful Saturn in Pisces, which I talked a lot about last week and the week before, and growing pressure from Uranus in change-resistant Taurus, and Pluto retrograde now, as the god of the underworld is reviewing its future plans for collective changes to society now, before he retrogrades back into Saturn-ruled Capricorn, or Saturn-ruled Capricorn's resistance again on June 11th. So again, replacing our old values for new ones may not come easily in the short term. This is what I said last week, as this requires standing firm against fierce opposition from others when Mars enters Leo and opposes Pluto May 20th. Now, clearly, that was close to a week ago. And since then, it's notable now that the debt ceiling negotiations here in the U.S. seem to blow up the day before this Mars ingress into Leo and its opposition to Pluto in Aquarius at the new moon, as we waxed toward the Mars-Pluto opposition a day later. And this was reported by CNBC, and here I quote, "High-stakes talks on the debt ceiling resumed Friday evening," that's May 19th, the day of the Taurus new moon, after a 6-hour pause triggered by House Republican negotiators walking out of the room in frustration. One of the toughest sticking points in the talks has been the question of spending caps, a key GOP demand, but a red line for many Democrats, end quote. Though the temperament of the congressman reportedly walking out was described as frustrated, remember the energy of Mars opposite Pluto, and this is me talking, can be particularly explosive. though it depends, of course, on where it falls, either in a particular individual's chart or that of, say, a nation. And that energy was magnified by the fact that Mars was waxing also into an exact square to Jupiter, creating a dynamic fixed T-square of Mars opposite Pluto and square to Jupiter, while Jupiter was also square to Pluto. But the Jupiter square Pluto aspect had already perfected on May 17th, but still this energy was very much in play. So knowing this, I was still a bit shocked when I saw this story, and I thought you guys might be interested in hearing this. I don't know how many people saw it. Didn't make the big national news. I saw the story in the New York Times on May 21st. So remember, that's the day after Mars perfected his opposition to Pluto. And I surmised that this T-square aspect's nuclear type energy must have triggered natal aspects in these people's charts. As sadly, and here I quote, an Indiana father was killed and his 2 children were injured after they went through a grandfather's belongings and found a hand grenade that detonated at a family home on Saturday. That was the 20th of May, the authorities said. The Lake County Sheriff's Department said on Monday that investigators were still trying to determine whether the device may have self-detonated because of its age or if the pin of the grenade was pulled. The explosion, the article goes on, which occurred Saturday, as I said, May 20th, sometime before 6:30 p.m., and let's note that the Mars-Pluto opposition actually perfected at 8:12 p.m. Pacific time and 11:12 p.m. Eastern time. This was in Indiana, so I'm presuming it was Central time, which is an hour before Eastern time, which would have made it 10:12 p.m., but they're saying before 6:30. So my point is that this aspect, which is has nuclear potential, was very strongly waxing at that time. And here the article continues, the explosion unleashed shrapnel that injured the father's 14-year-old son and 18-year-old daughter, who were taken to a hospital, the sheriff's department said in a statement. Their conditions were not immediately known on Sunday night, and the authorities have not identified members of the family. The father, 47, was found dead at the scene, the sheriff's department said. End quote. And I'm like, wow, oh my God, I hope these kids are doing okay by now, at least physically. But you cannot get more Mars-Pluto in frictional aspect than something like that. Anyway, so moving along, the sun then entered chatty, curious, sometimes fickle Gemini the next day on May 21st, where he'll remain until June 21st, when he moves forward into more sensitive Cancer. And the sun in Gemini then sextiled Mars in proud Leo on May 21st or 22nd, depending on your time zone. And this energy helped us to take the lead to accomplish our goals, and goals not just for ourselves, but those that we are working for or leading others to accomplish on behalf of them or on behalf of others. So in other words, it's not, the sextile makes it not a purely selfish or ambitious energy. We're working for everyone. By May 22nd, as Mars waxed toward perfecting its fixed square to Jupiter in Taurus, and that was perfected late May 22nd or early May 23rd, again depending, optimism returned to the debt ceiling negotiations, with CNN reporting, quote, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said he had had a productive discussion with President Joe Biden, but said a deal has not yet been reached on raising the U.S. debt ceiling. The White House said there were areas of disagreement, but that both staffs would continue talking, end quote. Now, Mars square Jupiter often produces an energy of over-optimism that can lead to risk-taking, or say, thinking you have a greater chance of success than exists within the actual realm of reality. Case in point, on May 22nd, Tim Scott, the junior senator from South Carolina since 2013, officially threw his hat into the ring to become the next president of the United States by declaring his candidacy. And according to NPR on May 22nd, and here I quote, Scott joins former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who declared her candidacy in February. It was Haley who just over a decade ago appointed him to the Senate to fill a vacancy. Both are very popular in their home state, which is a pivotal early voting state for both Republicans and Democrats. The South Carolina primary is the first in the South and often sets a candidate on a path for the nomination. Even so, an April poll by Winthrop University, wherever they might be, I guess in South Carolina, shows both Haley and Scott doing better than they do nationally. But even in South Carolina, both still trail Trump by a wide margin, end quote. Now, on a side note, Mars square Jupiter is also the kind of energy that can make us accident prone. So I thought I'd tell you a little personal story just real quick. I mean, I was out driving home from the grocery store on May 23rd, and it was raining slightly. And when I came to a red light behind another car and stepped on my brakes, I mean, I wasn't moving very fast at that point. I knew there was a red light. My car slid slightly. I think it actually did what they call hyperplane, and I banged into the car in front of me. Now, fortunately, it was an older car driven by a young woman, and when we pulled to the side of the road, it was clear that no damage was done, and we parted company amicably. But I remember thinking before I went out that day that maybe I shouldn't. But I'd already made lunch plans the week before and was just stopping at the store to pick up a few groceries on my way back. So, so much for paying attention to astrology, right? However, I do have to say that Jupiter, once it entered Taurus, is heading for my sun at 5 Taurus. So I don't know. Maybe that protected me, that whack, because it's not there yet, but it's waxing, right? Anyway, on May 24th, Venus in sensitive Cancer then squared wounded healer Chiron in Aries, challenging us to speak out against those who've hurt us, wounded us in the past. As this energy was waxing, NPR reported on May 23rd, quote, E. Jean Carroll aims to expand defamation lawsuit against Trump, seeking $10 million. And the article goes on the heels of a jury verdict that awarded $5 million to advice columnist E. Jean Carroll over her claim that former President Donald Trump sexually assaulted her in a department store dressing room in the 1990s, Carroll has asked a court to expand the scope of the separate lawsuit against Trump, seeking at least an additional $10 million in damages. In a set of court filings on Monday, that would be May 22nd, as the Mars-Jupiter and the Venus-Chiron squares were waxing, lawyers represented Carroll proposed a set of amendments to her original lawsuit to add information about the verdict, along with a transcript of Trump's remarks at a CNN town hall broadcast on May 10th, the day after the jury's decision in the other case. Quote, I never met this woman, I never saw this woman, Trump said on CNN. I wish I could do a better impression of him, but I leave that to the professionals. He called Carroll's story, quote-unquote, fake, and quote-unquote made up, and he referred to Carroll as a, quote, whack job. So I believe that most of us listening to this understand it's been proven at this point that Trump's Gemini Sun-Uranus conjunction, opposed by his fiery Sagittarius moon, or exaggerative and fiery, makes him a person with little to no impulse control, at least when it comes to his verbal communication. Now, last week I spoke about the bigger picture inherent in Jupiter's entrance into Venus-ruled Taurus on May 16th, and how the E. Jean Carroll trial verdict branding Trump a sexual predator could be seen as this planet's transit into the sun. Could be seen as this. Yeah, I'm like, let me reword that. Hold on. It could be seen as a sign of the expansion of society's belief. Jupiter has to do with our beliefs I mean, so does Saturn, but Jupiter is our optimistic, hopeful beliefs, our faith, I should say faith instead of belief, but it's the expansion of society's faith in the feminine divine and our reverence for natural cycles, including those related to the Taurian-ruled physical body. So also, as we wax toward that Venus-Chiron square on May 23rd, a major typhoon hit Guam, and as per CNN, and here I quote, the governor of Guam urged residents to continue staying home for their protection and safety a day after the strongest storm to impact the U.S. territory in decades slammed into the island. The eve of Typhoon Mawar passed just north of Guam, but the eye wall, the most powerful part of the storm, pelted the island with hurricane-force winds and heavy rain. According to the New York Times on May 24th, quote, I don't know if it's Mawar or Mawar, was upgraded to a super typhoon, meaning that its maximum sustained winds were at least 150 miles per hour as the storm moved over open water. The storm had packed Category 4 level winds of about 140 miles per hour at just prior to midnight local time on Wednesday as it passed over Guam, according to a local meteorologist from the National Weather Service. Now, more than a foot of rain fell across Guam, and that amount approached 2 feet in some areas, meteorologists said. Mawar was the strongest storm to hammer Guam in years and was expected to continue to generate tropical storm force winds before weakening on Thursday, the Weather Service, that's May 25th, the Weather Service forecaster warned. The storm had moved 105 miles northwest of Guam as of 11 a.m. local time, but typhoon warnings were still active, the forecaster said. There were no immediate reports of deaths or injuries, but the storm was so strong that it broke wind sensors and radar equipment that send meteorological data to the local weather service office, end quote. Now, number one, I just want to point out Guam is one of the U.S. territories, okay? So we do have a connection to them. And then to point out that some of you may remember that it was under a Mars-Jupiter square that an explosion at the Beirut port in Lebanon on August 4th, 2020 resulted in 218 deaths and the wounding of thousands of others. So this kind of event is not uncommon when Mars comes into frictional aspect to Jupiter, especially with, environmentally. Now also, in the case of Beirut, explosive material had been housed in warehouses at the ports, and the conditions became such that it ignited. So it was a shock, right? Because Mars, Jupiter can be, Mars is action and Jupiter expands the action, right? Now also, back to politics, on May 24th, GOP presidential hopeful Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced his candidacy in a poorly transmitted Twitter announcement along with Chief Twit Elon Musk. Much has already been lampooned and otherwise reported about this glitchy May 23rd announcement presentation made just hours after the fixed Mars-Jupiter square perfected earlier that morning. And the after effects, or the description of what happened was exemplified in the New York Times on May 24th thusly, and I quote, the headline read, "Awkward Silence, Ron DeSantis' bold Twitter gambit that flopped." And it goes on to say, the Florida governor wanted to show off his tech savvy by announcing his presidential campaign on Twitter. It quickly devolved into the conference call from hell. It was the announcement not heard round the world. Ron DeSantis plotted to open his presidential campaign early Wednesday evening with a pioneering social media gambit, introducing himself during an audio-only Twitter forum with Elon Musk. His 2024 effort began instead with a moment of silence, then several more. A voice cut in, then two, Mr. Musk's, only to disappear again. Now it's quiet, someone whispered. This was true. We get so many people here that we are kind of melting the servers, said David Sachs, the nominal moderator, which is a good sign. And then the person writing this article wrote, this was not true. And the article goes on, soon, all signs were bad. Hold music played for a spell. Some users were summarily booted from the platform, where hundreds of thousands of accounts had gathered to listen. I read elsewhere, I think it was 700-something thousand people who had tried to tune in. How many were there after all these glitches, I don't know. But the article continues, the servers are straining somewhat, Mr. Musk said at one point, perhaps unaware that his mic was hot, at least briefly. For 25 minutes, the only person unmistakably not talking, at least on a microphone, was Mr. DeSantis. End quote. This, interestingly enough, in a Uranian kind of way, follows the May 19th story, the day of the Taurus new moon, asking us to plant new updated sets of values. Remember when Daily Kos reported this headline and story? This is from May 19th, that's what I'm trying to say, the Taurus new moon, but it factors in, interestingly enough, now. And here's the quote from the article. The headline is, DeSantis campaign in turmoil after Disney refuses to repair candidate. Now, we remember that Disney and Governor DeSantis are warring, right? I'm sure I don't have to give you the details on that, and they're easily accessible pretty much anywhere online. But this will explain more. So the Daily Kos article goes on to read, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' planned presidential campaign was upended on Thursday when the Walt Disney Company told top campaign staff that Disney engineers would no longer repair or maintain the candidates' animatronic systems. Now, I didn't know that campaign nominees have animatronic systems, but that's just because I'm nowhere near a technically oriented person. In fact, for those who have listened for a long time, I refer to myself as TC, which is technologically challenged. But I just found this kind of amusing when I was reading it originally. Anyway, the piece goes on to say, the move comes after Disney announced the cancellation of a $1 billion planned Orlando development in the midst of a legal feud between the company and the Florida governor's office. The feud began after Florida lawmakers retaliated against Disney, one of the state's top employers, for statements opposing the Republican-backed Don't Say Gay legislation that DeSantis signed earlier this year. Disney's quote-unquote Imagineering department, which is responsible for developing and maintaining the special effects and complex moving animatronics used in the company's theme parks, was going to be housed at the planned Florida development known as Lake Nona Town Center. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' planned presidential campaign was upended on Thursday, and this we're talking about was last week, May 18th, as we waxed toward the Taurus new moon, when the Walt Disney Company told top campaign staff that Disney engineers would no longer repair or maintain the candidates' animatronic systems. And the move comes after Disney announced the cancellation of the $1 billion planned Orlando development in the midst of the legal feud. And I think I'm repeating myself. Yes, I am. So pardon me, because I must have copied this twice. Anyway, the article goes on. A company source involved with the decision cited, and we're talking about Disney, cited the feud with DeSantis, noting that the cancellation of Imagineering's planned relocation of 1,000 employees from California to Florida would make it difficult for current Orlando-based engineers to provide engineering and repair assistance to the DeSantis campaign. It's hard enough to stay on top of every animatronic figure in every ride in our Orlando parks, said the source. The company decided it couldn't afford to keep sending Imagineers to repair DeSantis every time his campaign hauls him to Iowa or other key campaign states. End quote. So, as I said before, since Jupiter's expansion and Mars is actually the ego drive, it's our personal will, ego desires certainly ran high with the Mars square to Jupiter. And it remains to be seen whether both DeSantis and Senator Tim Scott have actually overestimated their chances of success. I just thought it was particularly interesting, of course, that both announced their candidacies within days of the Mars-Jupiter square. Now, it's interesting to note, too, that this Mars-Jupiter fixed square represents the first quarter waxing portion of the Mars-Jupiter cycle, which began on May 29th of 2022 at 3 degrees and 19 minutes of Aries. By contrast, the August 4th, 2020 Beirut port explosion, which I mentioned before, occurred at the third quarter waning square of the last Mars-Jupiter cycle. So the next time, and I had the dates, but I don't have them in front of me. Maybe I'll pause and get them. But we'll be having a Mars opposite Jupiter, and then we'll have Mars in the third quarter waning square again. So those are the times that we want to watch. All right, I'm going to go get those dates. Hold on. Okay, so I got it now. So May 23rd on the East Coast, Eastern Time, the Mars square Pluto, as I mentioned already, I believe, is at 1 degree 28 minutes of Leo square Jupiter at 1 degree 28 minutes of Taurus. On October 28th of 2023, there will be the opposition. But at that time, the Mars will be at 11 degrees 15 minutes of Scorpio, opposite the same degrees and minutes of Taurus, Jupiter and Taurus. However, this is going to happen close to the Taurus full moon. And at that time, Mars will be conjoined to both Mercury and the Sun in Scorpio, and opposing Jupiter, which the moon is moving to conjoin in Taurus. So that is going to be a date to watch. The next is when Mars is at 10 degrees 52 Aquarius on February 27th of 2024, when we have the third quarter square of waning square of Mars to 1052 Aquarius to Jupiter at 1052 Taurus. And at that time, Mars will be conjoined. Mars will have passed over the 1 degree Pluto. So that's going to be something to watch too. Before that, I have to look up when that is exact. But now that I'm aware, it's going to be an interesting time. And Mars then will be conjoined to Venus, which will also be squaring Jupiter. And Jupiter will be approaching at that time a conjunction to Uranus. Well, that's a little ways away, though. So, and then finally, the new cycle will begin again on August 14th of 2024, when Mars meets Jupiter at 16 degrees and 40 minutes of Gemini and oppose the moon at 1531 of Sagittarius, while they all form a T-square, a mutable T-square, to Saturn at 1748 Pisces and Venus at 1142 Virgo. So another interesting date to watch, and we will see what happens. But as I said, these are interesting things to watch, particularly because Mars-Jupiter can be explosive. Now, I should explain, too, that Mars-Jupiter soft aspects, so when we say hard aspects, the conjunction, the square, the opposition, and potentially the quincunx, which is a 150-degree aspect, are problematic, usually. The sextile, 60-degree, and trine, 120, are usually much easier. And those in particular, Rob Hand points this out in his Planets in Transit book, they're very good muscularly and physically. They're an excellent time to give birth. And, I learned that after I had my son when I started studying astrology seriously. And look at my son's chart, SON, and he has Mars at 16-something Leo, trine Jupiter at 14-something Sag. And I gave birth to him as my first and only baby which, usually at first pregnancy, they say the labor, I mean, at that time, I worked with a lot of people who had kids or, had siblings with kids or whatever, and they would tell me about 36 hours of labor and 40 hours of labor and Pitocin and being, having to go in to get, what do you call it? Get the Pitocin so that they could stimulate the birth process. Anyway, stimulate labor. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, my son came out in 7.5 hours from start to finish. So I always laugh because and I find him to be in many ways that are interesting, a particularly lucky person, So anyway, I won't go more into that except to say that Mars-Jupiter has a positive side, of course. It's just that it might manifest a bit more positively when they're in soft aspect rather than hard aspect to each other. Now, this back to the Mars-Jupiter square, even though it's completed by now, I just think it's interesting for everyone to recognize that this is all these aspects, even though astrologers talk in the individual chart or even the mundane world, which is, looking at the events out in society, etc., that they dissipate quickly. And I've said this before, especially with the outer planets, they trigger, right? So the Mars square Jupiter coincidentally triggered these two candidacy announcements. Both of them are fairly hubristic in terms of their success, although we all know anything can happen. There's a long time between now and an actual election. But that on an individual basis, for each of us, we need to take care not to try to control or rule over other people. We don't want to expand our ego and say, I'm in charge and, I'm large and in charge and you're nothing. But instead to use this energy to increase our consciousness about the true limits of our resources, and that we make sure we don't overdo and later find ourselves lacking in such resources. So as I said before, taking risks, say like gambling, for example, which Jupiter is often prominently about, we can lose the house, I've mentioned before, I always think of a book I read in high school by Thomas Hardy called The Mayor of Casterbridge, where in the very beginning, the guy is traveling with his wife and daughter, and he gets involved in a poker game, I think it is, at a tavern, and he loses so badly because he keeps, betting things, that he ends up leaving behind his wife and his daughter. And he goes on because that's the only way he can pay his debt. So, exaggerated exaggeration, but, an interesting plot from the beginning of that book. So anyway, when we're talking about not overdoing our resources, it makes me think I'd really like to check out Senator Scott's fundraising war chest to see just how long it's going to last him. Just saying. I mean, we know that DeSantis has more money in the bank, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so meanwhile, Venus is sextile to Uranus in Taurus, which happened early today on May 26th, can help us resonate to others who may spark a change in our perspective that not only enlightens us, but just might revolutionize our life in some way. Now, back to politics, whether this relates to a change in the attitudes of those who back DeSantis, or a turn for the better in the debt ceiling discussions and the prospect of a deal being struck prior to the June 1st deadline, I don't know. But with Jupiter and Taurus, it's fingers crossed, right? So now we're at the point when tomorrow's May 27th monthly waxing first quarter lunar square of the Virgo moon to the Gemini sun is when we're going to be tasked, or right now we're tasked to push through those seedlings that were planted on May 19th at the Taurus new moon, and to tend to the sprouting of those seeds of newfound values, more relevant to our current lives as they begin to appear above the ground. In other words, the first quarter square every month is when we see the effects of the actions taken at the planting time. So it's a metaphor. Some of the tension inherent in this mutable monthly first quarter square, and it's only mutable this month, and when the, planets obviously in mutable signs during the squares, based on the new moon's energy, but it may well be related, something we should keep in our minds now, that the tension can be related to deciding whether accuracy and truth, which is Virgo's domain, the moon's in Virgo, lies in what we hear, Gemini, which is more superficial. I always say Chicken Little's running down the street, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And everybody starts telling everyone the sky is falling, but when they finally look up, the sky is not, in fact, falling. So we want to be able to discern the difference between what we know to be true, between what we hear, which can be superficial gossip or BS or whatever, without any backup, factual backup, and with what we know to be true deep in our soul, which is more representative of what we're working on during this portion of the lunar monthly cycle, our true Taurian values. And discerning the difference between the two is what's in play now as we wax toward next week's June 3rd Sagittarius full moon at 13 degrees and 18 minutes of Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius, the archetypal energy of expansion of consciousness. So we're going to talk more about that next week, and I'll write about that. But first, though, we might expect problems with authority figures this weekend. We're running here in the States into the Memorial Day weekend, when the Gemini Sun squares Saturn in Pisces on May 27th. Now, I'm not sure if that doesn't bode well for continuing debt ceiling negotiations, though at the recording time of this podcast, which is late on May 25th, both sides had declared that they were close. And there was this, according to the New York Times, quote, Republicans report progress in debt limit talks as negotiations continue. Negotiators reconvened on Thursday, this is May 25th, after working through the night to strike a deal, as hard-right Republicans and some Democrats expressed concerns about the shape of an emerging compromise. Republican congressional leaders said Thursday they were making progress toward a deal with President Biden to raise the debt ceiling while cutting spending, cautioning that an agreement that was still being hammered out would inevitably disappoint lawmakers in both parties. Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the California Republican, told reporters at the Capitol that bargainers had worked, quote, well past midnight, and poor babies, right, and resumed negotiations later on Thursday morning, trying to find a resolution to avert a default on the nation's debt before the projected June 1st deadline. He said that there were still, quote, outstanding issues, and that he had directed his negotiators to work 24/7 until there was a deal. I don't think everyone is going to be happy at the end of the day, McCarthy said, nodding to mounting concerns among some hard-right Republicans that their party was making too many concessions in the talks. That's not how the system works, he said. Democrats, too, were growing anxious that Mr. Biden would go too far in accepting Republican demands, including spending reductions and tougher work requirements on public benefit programs. They were huddling at noon in the Capitol to discuss the state of the negotiations. End quote. Now, while it seems indications at this point are that neither side will be jubilant in the end, on a personal level for each of us, the Sun square to Saturn reminds us that no matter how depressed we get, if we're trying to fight authority and we feel that we have no other resource but to succumb, and how this may in the end deflate our egos, make us depressed, make us feel lonely, make us feel like there's no hope, we must remember not to get thoroughly discouraged, but rather to realize that this aspect occurring now is urging us to realize, discover, understand that the real authority figure lies within. So this is tantamount to saying that we are each our own best parent, and that simply incorporating only the outer voices of those who've told, taught, or forced us to believe certain quote-unquote truths can't hold a candle to us listening to our own inner truths. And this then connects again in a more esoteric spiritual level the meaning and purpose of this waxing period of the Taurus new moon. And being able to develop values that are truths by which we can live, which come from our soul and not from our outer influenced ego. Doing so now helps us gain confidence in ourselves, which in turn provides a firmer foundation upon which lies our inner security. And when we project a strong sense of inner security outward, it results in outer security coming back at us. So, enough said. Okay, so back to the debt ceiling for a second. Remember I said last week that the sky lacked both fire and air at the May 19th Taurus new moon, and that the former could result in manic behavior? Now think meeting round the clock on the debt ceiling negotiations, and the latter in a lack of objectivity about social reform, Pluto being the only planet in an air sign. Well, June 1st, Mars in Leo's quincunx to Saturn in Pisces may call for some kind of last-minute adjustment before that June deadline named by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to avoid the beginning of defaults that may first affect those on Social Security, veterans benefits, Medicaid, and paychecks for government employees. We might remember, too, that the latter's union has already filed a lawsuit claiming a government default on the debt is unconstitutional and demanding President Biden invoke the 14th Amendment to prevent it from happening. Now, I'm not going to go into the meaning of the 14th Amendment because anyone can just simply Google it, but when Mars is in frictional aspect to Saturn, the result is usually some level of frustration. Again, on a personal level, it's best to get out and do some physical activity to alleviate any inner tensions around this time. Meanwhile, Jupiter begins to move closer to the transiting Taurus North Node, conjoining the mean North Node circa May 27th, though he won't meet the true node exact until sometime circa between May 31st and June 1st. So we're still looking at that June 1st date. And just as when Uranus conjoined the transiting Taurus true North Node degree back between July 31st and August 1st of 2022, and we moved forward towards achieving a necessary change in societal values, now such values may positively expand in the future. Okay, so I mentioned July 31st, August 1st of 2022, and it pays to remember now that this was the time when Uranus conjoined the North Node, usually pushing us forward towards our karmic destiny. But at the same time, we can remember that it was June 24th of 2022. That's the date that the Supreme Court came out with its Dobbs decision that wiped out women's rights to bodily autonomy and therefore to basic health care. Now, between late May and early June, when Jupiter conjoins the transiting North Node in Taurus, it will not only be June 23rd, 24th, the year anniversary of the Dobbs decision, but also when the transiting South Node will hit the October 25th, 2022 sensitized Scorpio solar eclipse degree to Scorpio. Now, I've mentioned that before, but I'd like to reiterate that I believe we're looking at an important time in terms of mobilizing the feminine divine in an expansive way. So, it's going to be a reminder again of how far we've come once again toward honoring the feminine divine's natural cycles, despite the legal pushback a year ago against the sanctity of equal bodily autonomy for all. And of course, I include transgender, people who are being maligned and all that for any reason, but the transgender issue is so prominent right now, right? So we can view this upcoming Jupiter North Node conjunction in Taurus now as blessing a successful pathway into the future. Now, you may recall also, so remember, when Uranus conjoined the North Node a year back in July, August, it sparked a revolution, right? So that was like a month or two after the Dobbs decision, which sparked a revolution. And now, when the North Node hits Jupiter, this will expand. Now, remember the October 25th eclipse occurred just prior to the November 8th, 2022 Taurus full moon lunar eclipse, which happened to be the U.S. midterm election day when the anticipated red wave failed to materialize. I've talked about that before too. So given that the meaning of this set of fall 2022 eclipses revolved around the mobilization of so many who voted out anti-conservatives who disrespect and disregard the power of the feminine divine, it pays to review these eclipses' meanings. As per, and I've said this before, but God knows I could say it a million times, as per Bernadette Brady explains in her book Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark, this eclipse series may be made up of individuals who, quote, exert a huge effort in some group activity. So there's little question in my mind, looking back now, that this group activity, or one of them at least, included voting. So while the Taurus-Uranus North Node conjunction paved the way for sudden progressive change in how we value the natural cycles of nature, which rule our day, sunrise to sunset, our year, season to season, etc., the Taurus-Jupiter North Node meetup, which is days away essentially, may well expand such reverence now. And while that seems unlikely at present, given the suppression of equal rights in the courts of not only women, but again so many others, Jupiter's both expansion and law, while Taurus is the physical body, which I've said already. So I don't think it's too far-fetched to assume that the current U.S. debt ceiling dilemma, which is the dilemma du jour, will clearly have to be solved by mid-June, if not earlier, given the Treasury Secretary's June 1st deadline warning. And because, again, Jupiter's nothing if not expansion, while Taurus often represents resources, which include money and finances, lifting the debt ceiling or expanding it rather than lowering it seems more likely to be indicated astrologically than the opposite. But hey, here's my disclaimer. I repeat, not a financial astrologer. But sometimes we can use common sense. As in, who in their right mind would risk the strong faith and full credit of the reputation of the United States for paying its debts in a timely fashion by sending the financial markets crashing, causing a recession if not a depression, never mind putting people out of work and delaying payments of all of those governmental agencies that I mentioned before. So, some of this is just basically insane to even contemplate. Okay, I want to spend the remaining 2 or 3 minutes that I've got to honor Tina Turner, whose death I think shocked a lot of all of us on Wednesday. And I took a quick look at her chart, so I just want to tell you all what I see. She was born November 26th of 1939 at 10:10 p.m. in Nutbush, that's one word, Tennessee. And she was a Leo rising, a Sag Sun Mercury in the 4th house, a moon opposite that in Gemini. And the first things I noticed were that, interestingly, Jupiter is at 2 degrees Taurus, 4 minutes, which is the opposite of that sensitized eclipse degree that I've just mentioned. Her progressed ascendant is at 1 degree, 19 minutes of Scorpio. And the south node is on it at that sensitized degree, although the south node, this is the mean node I'm looking at in my solar fire program, is 2 degrees 31 minutes. Regardless, Jupiter squared her natal Pluto at 2 degrees and 48 minutes of Leo in her 12th house. We don't know exactly, or I don't know exactly the time of her death, but it appeared that it probably occurred around the time that the Cancer moon had moved into her 12th house and triggered her 19 degree 32 minute Cancer Chiron. And that was an interesting thing, which also happens to square her natal 3 degrees 40 something minute Eris in the which is actually in the her 8th house, which of course is the house of death, and 12th house is the house of disappearance. So those are a few interesting things. The other thing is she was having a Uranus return, which happens every 84 years. Uranus on May 23rd, reportedly the day that she passed, but I don't have the time, was at somewhere around 19 degrees and 44 minutes of Taurus, and she has a natal, or had a natal, 19 degree 22 minute Uranus and Taurus in her 10th house. Some of you may remember that I said, I think last week, that Uranus transits tend to correspond pretty closely to the manifestation, rather than, as it's waxing or as it's waning. But also Uranus had just recently squared her ascendant descendant at 1724 Leo and 1724 Aquarius, respectively. So in any case, Godspeed her I said her progressed ascendant. The transiting ascendant was at 2650 at about 4 o'clock p.m. on May 23rd, which would have conjoined her 2723 North Node in her 3rd house, which is interesting too. So, as we like to say in the astrological world, you can't make this shit up. There's another thing here too. Oh, Saturn was at 6 degrees, approximately 42 minutes in her 7th house of partnership, squaring her 714 Gemini moon. So those are just a few things that I thought were interesting. Saturn also was squaring her 4 degree 6 minute Sun and her 7 degree 10 minute Mercury in Sag in her 4th house. So she has returned home. Godspeed to Tina Turner. Simply the best. All right. So thank you everyone so much for joining me again today. And I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me again next week on June 2nd for another podcast. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.